Far Cry has gone through so many changes ever since the first game. What started as an FPS game with some supernatural elements and mutants eventually evolved into what we now would call an open world tick box list simulator, or rather I would call it that way. But that's Ubisoft for you. They always seem to have this need to pack a massive map into their games with fuck all to do other than just picking up herbs, hunting and killing the same grunts just in different locations. Okay, so I might come across a little bit overzealous on the critique of this series. Let it be known that I actually enjoy Far Cry quite a fair bit. Just don't fucking tell anyone. Exploring these varied, vast, big open world maps on motorcycles, airplanes, motorboats, it's always really fun. However, these games are packed with so much action that sometimes it's just really hard to get away from the FPS action in the games to enjoy just anything else that's also a content in those games. And thus the action itself becomes a bit of a ball ache. But recently Ubisoft announced that the new Far Cry 6 will actually have a way in which the player will be allowed to explore the map without too much hassle, but more on that later. So the question I'll be trying to answer today is Far Cry changing? Let's go down the memory lane and see if change is even possible in those games. The first game was such a massive thing for me because while there might have been other FPS games around at the time, I haven't really played any other game in which you had a big tropical island to explore, enemies to shoot, and you could fly around and sail and swim and do all this crazy shit. The saturated tropical setting and all the action and all the fun things that you could do in the game just made such a magnificent holiday for your senses. You could nearly smell the sun and the petrol burning in every single pore in your enemies' dead bodies. The game also had some mutants in it that you could kill, but that has kind of been lost in games that followed the first Far Cry. Although I was hooked, I skipped Far Cry 2 because I don't really know why. I guess if you look at the cover art for the first game and the second game, the second one just looks so bland and brown and boring. Anyway, this is the game in which Far Cry made a big step towards the open world design, as the world of Far Cry 2 would no longer be confined to areas. It would be a big open map that you could explore. Instead of tropical islands, you now had a desert, and with the desert came malaria, which was actually a game mechanic in that game because you would have to keep an eye on your virus levels to make sure they actually stay alive, and if it gets too high you'd have to take a medicine to lower it down a bit. I don't know, in hindsight it just wasn't really something that appealed to me at the time because I didn't want to play Far Cry to die slow and horrible death. What I wanted from Far Cry was to ride a motorcycle or a speedboat and 360 my enemies from the back of it. And so then came Far Cry 3, which was precisely that. Far Cry 3 was Far Cry 1 but on steroids. You were once again on the tropical setting, and now it was an open map with all of these activities such as racing and doing all these stunts and whatnot. I also think a massive plus in Far Cry 3 was one of the main villains, Vaas. I think he's still considered one of the best video game villains even now, right next to, I guess, Bowser and the top border from Tetris. The story starts like any good story should, with a lot of booze, a jungle, and a bunch of murdering pirates. Your friends, your girlfriend, and her boyfriend all get kidnapped by Vaas and his cronies. And so you set out on a massive journey across the island to murder and burn all of your enemies to free your friends, while also killing the flora and fauna of the whole tropical island and getting a pretty hot shit tattoo on your right... No, that's your left arm. One of the big things that would kind of be noted by the gamers that was a bit of a negative flavour to the game was something that we already saw in Assassin's Creed. And this would be to climb these high structures to scout the nearby area to uncover all of the points of interest surrounding you. But nobody really paid that much mind to it at the moment. Far Cry 4 was the next game in the series, and it was pretty much a copy and paste gameplay wise of what Far Cry 3 did. However, it was a big step towards what Ubisoft now calls a non-political narrative. In this case, Ubisoft Kenobi was comfortably sat on the fence regarding the Nepalese civil war. The towers were once again back, and this is where the players kind of clicked and they were like, wait, hang on a minute, you're just copy and pasting the previous game, aren't you? Considering that towers were in Far Cry 3 and pretty much all of the Assassin's Creed games, which led to them becoming a joke, people wanted some change. Famously, you could finish Far Cry 4 in just under 15 minutes by allowing the main protagonist to finish his lunch with the main villain right at the start of the game, so he could simply be AFK and finish the game. After this came Far Cry Primal, which I kind of want to ignore in this video because while it was a Far Cry game, I do not consider that to be a Far Cry game. It was rather a different game, just set on the rules of a Far Cry game, that makes sense. And it also had the name tag on it, but yeah, that's about it. Anyways, the lack of political narrative continued in Far Cry 5, where we fought a bunch of religious zealots high on acid, set on a war to make the States brilliant again. First time I played this game was at my friend's house, and I absolutely fucking hated it. So the story is, in this game you could go and fish, and because I like fishing in video games, I thought I might just do that. So I was travelling to this peaceful and quiet spot where I could fish, and on the way there I was attacked by 5 trucks and 3 choppers. Once I got rid of them and I did arrive to the spot, a massive motorboat just turned up the stream with a machine gun on it, and the people on the boat started redecorating my body with bullet holes, which, as you might imagine, scared away all the fish. I was really annoyed because the game provided me with a choice. Do you want to go fishing, do you want to go fight, or do you want to go and drive around like a dickhead? So I chose to go fishing. However, the game clearly thought that this was a bad idea because what it wanted me to do instead was drive around and kill people. And this is how my player agency was taken away from me. Anyways, I've played through Far Cry 5 about a year ago and I did enjoy it once I've learned to ignore everything in the game other than just the action. It turned out that Far Cry 5 is actually a pretty good FPS experience. Now, with Far Cry 6 just around the corner, Ubisoft seems to be thinking of new ways to make the players able to express themselves a bit more in the games. This time the player will explore Cuba, which is not Cuba because, you know, Ubisoft doesn't want to take any sides in any political conflicts whatsoever, fuck that, no. So anyway, you will now be able to holster your weapon, which will allow for passive exploration of the map because if you haven't got your weapon drawn out, enemies will not target you up to a point. Eventually they'll just realise that you are fucking ugly and they just want to shoot you on the spot. I think this is actually a pretty good idea because this will allow the players to actually go out and explore the map, build their own conviction against the regime, and then pick up the pistol to go and fight against it. This does sound good, but I'm skeptical. Far Cry is an FPS franchise first and foremost. Ubisoft wants you to run around the map like a dickhead and shoot everyone on sight. It wants you to have this crazy power fantasy where you are made to think that you can overthrow the regime just by yourself and maybe with a little bit of help from your sidekick, Lethal Chicken or whatever the fuck they will put in that game. There is apparently also going to be a mechanic where you can bribe some enemies to help you reach your goals, but I don't think it'll be much more than just paying somebody to uncover points of interest within camps, such as, I don't know, alarms or heavy duty units. You know, all the shit they could do in previous games by just using your binoculars. So even though this sounds like an interesting choice of, you know, in gameplay, I don't think people will bother with this that much after a few times because you can just fucking scout the area with binoculars, probably.